It's a high-tech conversation.
And a low-tech topic.
Live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Bench Talk 101.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Bench Talk 101. Long time coming tonight, but we have a speaker tonight. And without ado, I'm going to, before I do that, before I hand over to Mitch and to Joshua, I'm just going to remind people that tonight will be a speaker. Rusty is going to introduce him, and then we'll let Joshua tell us his story, or what he's going to tell us about what he does. Afterwards, we'll have questions, and you can put your name in the chat at any time, and I will go through the list and highlight people and let you ask questions afterwards. So I'm now going to let Rusty and Josh unmute themselves, and I will spotlight them for everyone. There's Rusty and Josh. Welcome to both of you. Over to you, Mitch.
Thank you.
Rusty,
Thanks, Scott.
sorry.
Josh, thank you for being with us. As a way of introduction, I was actually thinking about how I found out about you, and I couldn't quite figure it out, but I know that I've been following you on social media for a while. And
You read a lot of comic books. That's probably, and I'm usually in the back by the sea monkeys in the very back. Yeah.
No, but I remember you posted pictures of, I don't know, some taken stain out of tabletops or whatever, and I asked you, how'd you do it? And I think you said something about unicorn tears. And I was like, okay, well, I gotta have to work harder to get his magic. So then finally you came over and we had some wonderful Southern Indian food. And that's when I pitched this, hey, you can carry a conversation, come talk to woodworkers. So here you are. So tell us what you do and what it's about.
Well, thanks for having me, Rusty. I appreciate the invite to be with all of you from kind of all over the world, it sounds or seems. This is kind of a neat thing. I guess we're all getting more familiar with this concept thanks to COVID, but it's cool that we can all talk about things that don't matter to anybody but the 30 of us, but we'll have a good time. Most of what I do is not creating or making from scratch. I would assume, and I may be wrong, there may be some of you that do different, but most of you probably are from the creating realm. You're mostly probably woodworkers per se, and you make projects of various types. I am a restorer, so I do make some things. I sometimes get talked into making a project for somebody. We do end up at times having to make parts and pieces for various things, but most of the time my concept is to kind of have some Zen bond with the unknown person like yourselves that are the makers of these objects that are in, for some reason, disrepair or in need of a little love. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for everybody who makes something from nothing. My whole concept is to keep your pieces alive. When the time comes, they need to be kept alive.
So you just time travel, basically. That's what
I time travel. Yes, exactly.
Go back to 300 years ago.
I island hop and continent hop, and I go back in time and try to commune with whoever this unknown, unnamed, nobody worker that made this thing or designed this thing, and try to pick up clues, kind of reverse engineering, looking at the tool marks and the joinery and the type of wood that they use, and anything we can figure out to clue us in on, okay, what were they thinking and why did they make this decision?
So maybe this is a good time for you to share some of the pictures, and we'll go through some of the examples, the things that you do, and I'll keep asking questions along the way. You want to start there?
Yeah, that's totally fine. So we did put a few photos together of just some various things I encounter and have done.
I should warn people, there's 612 pictures, so it might take a minute, but just be patient.
Most of them are nude. So I need to bear with me as we get started here. I'm going to go into this.
We're very familiar with this look of a deer in the headlights of how do I share this? There it is. See, that's all I needed to know. How do you go from this to something that looks nice without unicorn tears?
So this is a mahogany pie crust table that has obviously the finish has just been worn pretty hard.
And this is like 200 years old or so?
No, actually, this was a very, very well done reproduction, probably from the 70s, maybe the 80s at the newest. Wow. But it was done correctly. It was done period correct and with a lot of quality. But it was a shellac finish, and shellac can last much, much longer than what you see here and what I just told you. But in modern times where people are doing their fingernail removal and spilling their drinks when they're on bench talk and such as this, shellac can take a beating in our modern world with modern cleaners. So when I can, one of the things that I like to do is see how least invasive I can be with a piece. It's one thing to just strip and start all over, and sometimes that's just exactly what we have to do. That's just the best thing. But whenever I can, I try to keep as much of the originality to a piece. In a situation like this from the 70s or 80s, maybe not such a critical thing, but I always do it anyway. So when the next project is from the 1880s, 1870s, we're practiced, you know, we kind of use the same philosophy. So this being shellac, as most of you probably know, the solvent for shellac being denatured alcohol or meths, you can carefully re-amalgamate a finish sometimes using its own solvent. Some are easier to do with others. None of it's ever very easy to do, but this shellac I wanted to bring along. Here's some more examples of what we were dealing with to start with. This is what we got it to. And we did not strip the finish here. Now you see the color shift. That's a big part of what was the problem, is the top had been sun bleached sitting in a window and the base was still nicely dark and robust. But we basically, it's like a French polishing technique, which is charging a pad or a rubber and your hand working it. But instead of applying shellac, we're applying a solvent coating very slow and carefully. You can brush it on, you can use a rubber like that to basically re-amalgamate the old shellac that's there, get it to liquefy, redistribute it, start evening it out. And once we've kind of gotten a good foundation with the original shellac, then we can maybe start infusing that pad with a little new shellac and getting a better coating put back down.
And were you adding pigment as well?
We actually only used orange shellac on this table.
That's it. Okay.
That is it. It is a naturally orange.
You didn't pour like alcohol and set it on fire like they do on YouTube?
No YouTube tricks on this one. This was just truly
I don't know why we invited you in here, man.
Come on. No.
We want some trickery.
Hibachi tricks on this this thing.
Just and how do you know it was shellac? What's the process of identifying?
One of the best things you can ever do if you do find yourself wanting to repair a finish to something is to try to figure out what it is, or at least eliminate some of the things from what it isn't. So we would use a small bit of, in this case, denatured alcohol on a little rag or a little cotton swab in an inconspicuous area, start rubbing a little bit. If it starts getting sticky, then you've got most likely a shellac or some alcohol soluble finish. If it doesn't, then you can step up to a more aggressive solvent, like at that point, maybe lacquer thinner, because shellac and lacquers are probably the two biggest, most commonly used. If it starts getting, it's very important to do it in that process. If you started with the lacquer thinner, shellac's going to start dissolving with that too, and that doesn't mean that it's shellac. Right. So you start with the least aggressive solvent, working up, and then when you get something to start shifting with it, you go, okay, this is probably this, and then you've identified things. And
so how do you know if it's epoxy finish?
Epoxy finish.
You go all the way up to
if it looks like garbage in a river, that's how you know. Just kidding, guys. Those river tables keep them coming. That's just the work of art. We got to have them.
Okay,
now,
let's move on to the next picture.
So this is a very common thing you might see with your finishes on your old pieces. You guys probably have older items in your home. If you look at them close and from raking light, you can see these little crazes.
Like alligator skin.
Yeah, that's very much called alligatoring, or it's a crazed finish. And basically the elasticity of the finish, as the wood expands and contracts over time, the elasticity of the finish will go along for the ride, and everybody's happy until one day it doesn't. And the wood is never going to stop doing that. And it shifts, the finish doesn't, and it starts with these micro fissures. And then as the wood continues to do that, these fissures just kind of get bigger and bigger, to be much, much, much more severe than what we see here. This is bad, but it's not terrible. This is a finish, though, I felt like that I could re-amalgamate and save. This was a stand for a model ship in Annapolis for a display for the Naval Museum. And there was a little bit of provenance there. So it was important to me, if I could, save the originality of this piece. As simple as it was, it's just a slab for the most part.
How little of a provenance?
Pardon?
How little of a provenance?
I don't understand in terms of.
You said a little bit of provenance.
Oh yeah, well, yeah,
it's
not super prized piece in itself, being the display base, but it was, I don't know, from the 1920s maybe, but it was specifically made by the Naval Museum, by naval officers for this museum. So we wanted to keep as much of that intact if we could. So I did a little bit of a different approach with this. Instead of just patting it down to begin with, I started wet sanding it. And instead of just using dry abrasives, I can do really, really fine grits. And when you wet sand, as some of you may know, you're actually speeding up the efficiency of your sanding tenfold. Like, it's just going to happen really, really fast. You can overdo it when you switch over to the wet sanding. But it also allows you to work with some higher grits in a very controlled way. So there's a little bit of do a little homework on wet sanding, practicing with that, but that's the way we started here. And we were able to get it really, really smooth. And I applied almost just the slightest amount of extra shellac to this piece. It was mostly refining what we started with there. And so this is what we got it down to. This is in the daylight outside.
And this is just with sanding. This is without applying more.
Correct. Wow. And that's pretty glossy, as you can see. My handprint waving here. It's got a lot of sheen in it. You can see the light behind, but it just wasn't gonna be what I was looking for. So I started polishing on it, and this is where we introduced a little bit more shellac and polishing, and really, really brought up the sheen a lot. And ultimately, we got it. There's some poetry here that you're looking at the reflection of trees in a slab of wood. There's no glass. And in fact, this is just bug secretion and wood, so it is very natural thing to look this cool. So I just loved, I am looking at trees in this piece of wood. Again, very, very little extra finish was applied to that original hazed, crazed, dead finish, and we got it to this. So you can do a lot of salvaging of the originality to different pieces in certain cases. If you ever do try amalgamating, you need to have your arms completely wrapped around the fact that it is very likely that will not work, and you need to be prepared to strip. This is just one of those extra rolls of the dice. Let's see if we can save it, but don't ever plan on, like, there's no way whatsoever that we can lose this finish. Let's try re-amalgamating it, because you may end up.
Can
Go
you
ahead.
only do it with shellac, or can you do it with
No, you can
oil finishes as
re-amalgamate
well?
with any finish that can be turned back to a liquid. So waterborne finishes don't do that. Most of
Okay.
them.
So just shellac and lacquer?
Any solvent-based type finish can usually do that. Now, some varnishes, once they get hard, you're going to have a very hard time getting them to reflow again. So 90% of the time, the only thing, well, even more than that, 99% of the time, the only thing we attempt is shellac and lacquer for re-amalgamating, because
Okay.
even then, it's just a hard thing to do.
So Josh, this is probably too early to ask this question, but I feel like I need to, this is a good connection to it. So as makers,
Yeah.
this is one of those things that we should keep in mind, right? It's how possible is it to restore this item later on?
And that's really a big part of my personal philosophy as a restorer when I'm speaking with makers of any kind, is most of the time, all of the decisions that you're making when you're thinking about making an item, whatever work you're doing, how well it can be repaired usually isn't one of those things you think about. You're thinking about what wood selection, the size, maybe the color you want to utilize, or finishes, but you really don't think about when shit hits the fan, what will happen. There's some people that have the philosophy of, well, it'll last as long as I'm alive, and by then I really, who cares? You need to get out of craftsmanship. That's not the world for you. We're in it for the long haul, and these items that we work with should, with the proper attitude and creation and attention, outlast us, all of us, many times. Most of the things that I work on, it's physically impossible for the people who had anything to do with it to have been alive when my grandfather was born, or even much longer. You guys being in Europe, you encounter old even easier and more frequently than we do. And so this is way more the case with you guys.
So that
how
goes
did those
to
pieces survive all of those centuries and these moves and life changes and wars and things that happened on the planet all that time? How did it happen? And there are some really basic elements to woodworking that you guys know well: proper joinery, proper material selection. But when you think about what you're doing, what you're going to do, consider, what am I engineering into this piece that will allow the repair factor to be as high as I can possibly make it? When and sometimes it's very easy to think, well, I'll use the absolutely most bulletproof, durable finish known to man. I'm going to use some conversion varnish that's just hot on the market, and this stuff is so tough. And it is very tough, but it's not tough enough to never be damaged in our world. And it's going to have a problem one day. And when it does, can that conversion varnish be removed or manipulated in a way that will allow a very successful repair? Or I'm going to use this adhesive that's just, so tough. Okay, well, can somebody then get into that joint and, undo that, do what they need to do, and get it put back together without having to pry things apart and splinters go flying because you picked this really tough thing? There needs to be some repairability in most of the materials you choose and the joinery or techniques that you decide to use when you're building this thing. So somebody like me can come in with the utmost respect to whoever it was that made your pieces and say, let me keep as much originality. This man or woman engineered these things a certain way. It was made for this very thing, this way. I don't want to second guess that. It's lasted for 137 years. That's good enough for me. Let's put it back the way it was, and we can do that. So that's just my personal philosophy on something to think about that's a little bit different than what you would normally hear about when you're making your decisions on the front end of your projects.
And that goes not to just finishes and adhesives, right? It also goes to the thickness of veneer you're going to use.
Anything, yeah. What thickness of veneer? What type of veneer are you going to? What kind of substrate you're putting your veneer on? Are you going to put it on MDF because of all the great reasons to put it on MDF? Or are you going to put it on MDF because of all the bad reasons? And makers won't tell you those things. They don't know. They just make the piece. It looks good when they're paid for it. You know, a year or two later, they have word that it's still doing okay. But what about, 12 years later? Or
so let me ask you this. So give me an example of something that was very difficult to restore because of, and I think you have pictures of that here, or something that was difficult to restore, but it was done so well that it was more possible to restore. Yeah, so I'm guessing you're not going to take any IKEA made furniture commissions.
If there's not real wood, the chances of us being able to repair things successfully go down quite quickly. And that's surprisingly more and more the case, at least here in America, for the modern day finishes. I know it is where you guys are because none of it's made in America, and most of the world's getting the same modern stuff from the same areas. There'll be a few bits of wood. If it's veneered, it may have veneer that's so thin that you just look at it wrong and it starts coming apart on you. So lifting the veneer, doing what you need to do, and putting it back down just isn't going to happen very, very likely. We go through these types of things all the time as we get called, which is why I try to dodge modern furniture as much as I can when clients call. There's just and some people pay a lot of money for it. It's expensive. It doesn't matter if you go to a nice showroom and buy expensive modern furniture, or you go around the bend to the bargain place. Odds are it came from the same place, just on the quality end of the building, or the crap end, and they're using the same stuff, the same materials, the same techniques. The nicer stuff has a little bit of nicer finishes and a few embellishments to it, but it's largely the same crap that has very low repairability. Speaking about shellac, this is another photograph of a stripped table. There's no finish here. And here we have put shellac on this table. Absolutely no color work at all. This is the same thing we did on that pie crust table in terms of a orange shellac being used. That's all the color that this stuff needed, right? I mean, that is just gorgeous, and there's no stains, no dyes, which made the color work at the ultimate in clarity, because you're not obscuring anything with a pigmented stain or anything of that nature. Shellac is a finisher's best friend. Notoriously, woodworkers are the worst finishers you can ever find, and I say that lovingly to you guys, but Lord have mercy, I'd sooner get a plumber over here to tell me what his thoughts on finishing were as a woodworker. I'm from the woodworking world. My father's a custom home builder. I learned the trade by via the eyes of a carpenter. So I've just kind of grown up through woodworking. So don't take offense to that. I'm a woodworker too, but I've worked in a lot of woodworking shops and retail shops, and those guys are the worst finishers that you could ever encounter. It seems like finishing's like making, man. The finishing's almost like the black arts. It's voodoo stuff. Like, I don't want to go down that aisle and look at all that stuff. It's confusing, and it can be, and the manufacturers don't really make it much easier to digest and understand some basic principles. But you can do some amazing stuff with a few simple principles. Shellac is going to be your very best friend. If you have trouble with shellac, do not give up on it. Work it, refine it.
Even for tabletops.
For tabletops, it is almost it is extraordinarily rare that I do a project that at some point, somehow, somewhere in the finishing schedule, shellac isn't introduced, either as a sealer coat over my color work or as the total finish, whatever. Shellac is so wonderful for so many different reasons. I
actually use it between the coats of milk paint on chairs, between the colors.
It's
because
wonderful for a
everything
sealer or a
sticks,
barrier coat
right.
in that principle, because
And everything sticks
shellac
to it.
bonds to just about everything, and just about everything bonds to shellac.
Yeah.
And when we're doing refinishing, there can be contaminants in the pores of the wood that have been happening little by little because of people cleaning with things like Pledge. I don't know what its equivalent in the UK would be, or but Pledge is a dusting and polishing all in one thing that kind of ran everybody using paste wax out, and you just spray it on and wipe it, and Bob's your uncle. Everything looks wonderful until about 4 days have passed, and you walk back in the room and you're like, I just dusted this crap. Why is there dust all over it again? It's not because you have some magic dust factory in your house. Silicone is in the Pledge in a lot of these polishing things. Silicone's the #1 dust attractant to men. If you get a silicone glue thing, glue cups or whatever in your shop, those will be the dustiest thing in your shop. The dust just bonds right to that silicone. And you can blow it off or whatever. You can wash it, and when it dries, you realize there's still dust there. It attracts dust. This is not by coincidence. These polishes and stuff, you burn through the polish a lot faster because you're dusting that much more often.
But
the
that's
trick
a good
with that,
business model.
yeah, it's wonderful from that perspective. But for somebody like me, you're basically putting silicone poisoning and contamination on your pieces of furniture. And a little by little, over all of these years of doing that, it will leach through the finish. It will get into the pores of the wood. And even when we chemically strip and prep this ready for finish, it still can be in those pores of the wood. And when we start applying the finish, everything but dust is repelled by the silicone, including the new finish that we're putting down. So it fish eyes up. It leaves these little acne scar marks or pock marks where it's basically a surface tension issue where the liquid of your finish won't go there, and there's a void. It's like the opposite of a bubble. It's a crater. And it's the finisher's worst nightmare. And this comes largely from silicone contamination. It can come from other contaminations. So this is why we don't like silicone products, but it's also why I use shellac as a barrier coat, because shellac will stick to silicone contamination, and you can put a nice barrier over all of that, and you just locked all of that contamination underneath it. And now when you go to put your next coatings or finish, you're not trying to bond to the same surface you once were. You're just trying to bond to the seal coat, the shellac sealer there, and you have a higher chance of success with that. So stay with the shellac no matter what your preferences are. You can color with it, you can seal with it, you can finish with it. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's completely natural.
So that brings me to color. You mentioned color.
Yeah,
Can
color
you show
is
us some? I mean, color. Aside from me being colorblind, matching color.
Yeah, let me
to
get
me
you to. So here's a common thing that you'll see. Poplar. It's so popular to work with. It works wonderfully. It tools well. It's got a very stable wood grain. It's nice, tight grain, but everybody knows you can't finish poplar. It's just a paint grade wood. And go back to whoever told you that and remind them how full of crap they are, because you can color any wood any way you want to. You just have to do it. This is all poplar right here. This below was how it came to me, of this cedar lined chest, blanket chest. And as we started stripping it, we realized this was completely poplar. And I was going to have to jump through some extra hoops to make it happen, but it can happen. This is all green, olive green poplar wood that most people will tell you just cannot be stained or
you
colored.
have to paint it.
You have to. I mean, that's the law of the land, right? But you don't. I worked on some countertops. Same scenario. This house was getting ready to put on the market. The owners needed to put some love into this kitchen. It had hickory cabinets, and they thought the countertops were hickory too. We started stripping it off and realized a lot of faux work had been done to these. They probably spent more on these countertops originally by using an inexpensive poplar, but having to do all of this faux finish work on top of it to make it look like it wasn't poplar. Kind of silly, but it still stands to reason. It shows this really green, unwelcoming wood would just be the death of a beautiful kitchen until it wasn't. This is what we ended up doing with this kitchen. And, you know, it sold really, this was featured in some magazines once we got through.
Very cool.
And so you can do a lot of things with crap wood, you know. That is a really good segue for the conversation that many of you may have had, or the way you guys think, or if you at least heard. I don't really care about color when it comes to finishes. I choose the wood for its characteristics. I like to just use a clear finish on there and show that wood, you know, without trying to offend anybody. That's kind of pussy.
That's okay. We'll edit it out. Don't worry about it.
Sorry about the YouTube fam. That's kind of not what you want to do, is what I'm trying to say. If you want to make that decision, and we make that decision all the time in the shop, this piece of wood is so gorgeous. The last thing we want to do is take away from its natural color and characteristics. We want to showcase that and not pull away from that. That's wonderful. And sometimes the very best way you can do that is to be a master of color. And you can make unpopular poplar be popular. And by just giving an unwelcoming wood a little bump here or a bump there, or perhaps you're working with cherry, and you know you almost need a semi's truck worth of cherry to get through all of the sapwood to keep the color consistent for the project you're working on, because cherry just shifts in color one section to the next, or one board to the next. And if you want that nice, perfectly consistent wood tone across that natural cherry look, you're going to have to go through a lot of wood, which is fine if you want to do that. But what are you going to do with all that thrown out cherry? Make another thing that's all that color? Or you could learn a little bit of color tricks and it be very natural looking. It doesn't have to be, you know, orange or purple just because you're doing color work. You can make it look like there's no color work been done to it. You're just switching it from the unusable natural look it has to a very usable natural look. That is
so without doing a 3 years of color theory, can you give us a couple of simple tricks, or at least ideas how you think through matching the colors? Because you have to do it in your work all the time, right? When you have to make a new piece and make it look 300 years old. Yeah, we do. How do you think through this?
Well, a lot of times when we're doing advanced color work, we're trying to color match, and we'll keep a part of the piece untreated, and we're working on our new finish to match that old thing in tone or the sheen or what have you. It is a very difficult rabbit hole to go into just to basically touch on it, but color theory is so important. That basic kindergarten stuff with the color wheel, you guys probably don't have it burned in your mind. I really don't either. I always refer back to that. I've got volumes of books on color theory. There's lots of color theories. Some have been proven wrong. Some have just a different approach to it. It's a very, very deep subject, but you can do a lot with just that basic color wheel. And they make one for wood finishers, a color wheel. It kind of corresponds a lot with the Trans Tint product line. I don't know how prevalent that is in the UK, but it's basically a dye-based pigment, liquid pigment that will dissolve in water or alcohol. So you can make water-based stains or dye finishes, or alcohol-based. You can tint your shellac with it. You can tint your lacquer with it. You can do a lot of things with that kind of thing. But anyway, the color wheel won't necessarily be just your primary color type things like artists will use. It's specifically based on wood tones, wood stain tones, and you can figure out if I'm starting with this color, which would be your natural wood tone, because it definitely factors in. We're not starting with a clean slate when we're doing wood like an artist does. We don't have a white canvas. We've got a slightly brown or tan, or in this case, green. So it'll always change based on the wood that you're starting with. But using those color wheels to help you dial up things, it gives you a good visual that you're not having to try to remember things from the last thing. But one of the most valuable things I can tell you to do is a step panel. Take a piece of the wood, if you're making something, especially a piece of the wood that you're going to be working with, a nice size piece, go all the way through your entire finishing schedule that you want to do. Not just the stain work, the color work. Put all of the coats of finish on it that you are going to do. If you're going to wax this piece too, wax it. I mean, all the way to the final done thing. Buff it, the whole thing. It'll take the scariness out of when you open that can of finish and you're kind of got that anxiousness about when you're first about to put the brush on the piece. That's kind of going to go away because you've just recently been doing this on your step panel. You've got your bearings, and you know exactly what to expect, how this product's going to interact with the product you're going to do in the next phase, how long it took to dry, did something not work quite as well as you thought it was going to work, do you put your color on and realize it's a little too red, I need to shift this, can I use a toner, or do I need to back up and try a different thing to begin with? You can work all that stuff out, and you've got this beautiful roadmap of exactly where this thing's going to go when you're done, because you don't want to be experimenting on your labor of love on this nicely done piece that you've put so much time and energy on. Because the truth is, guys, I don't care how great a piece is, it does not matter. You can go to any furniture shows, competitions, or whatever, we see it all the time. Pieces beautifully built in every way, and if the finish is 80% there, that piece sucks. It just doesn't sell anybody from across the room.
First thing you see.
It is, and that's what I tell everybody. It's like a race. You start and finish at the exact same line in a car race, and this is finishing for woodworkers. Start with your finishing and figure that out, and then make all of your decisions based on what you've learned from your step panel from then on out. And then you close out by doing exactly what you did on your step panel, and you can save that, and on the back side have all your steps written there as to what you did, what you went through. And the next time somebody says, hey, I saw that table you did for these people 3 years ago, or the same client calls you up and says, we want another one, we're really ready to pay you to do another thing with that finish on it, you're not going, oh my gosh, I think it was this, or let me try to work out a thing to match the old table I did. You can do it all just cranking it right out, because you've got a step panel that helped you in the first place, and the instructions are on the back of it to tell you, this is my secret formula for how I got this to look this way. So one of the best things anybody can do with finishing, and that's not a beginner trick. I do that nonstop all the time, because you just have to do it. You know, we just have to do that.
I'm gonna go and research what step panels are.
It's just a piece of wood, and you're going through all your steps.
But it has notes on it.
All you do is write on the back what you did.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's a piece of wood that you write on the back, tape a piece of paper to it, write on the masking tape, stick it on the back, whatever you want to do. Here's a table that was custom built. It was absolutely rode hard, put up wet, and then they decided to go with a cheaper restorer. They nearly ruined the table, and they decided to come back and pay me, which now was going to be far, far more, because I had to undo what the previous restorers didn't do. This is a crazed finish that the previous restorers decided they were just going to spray right over top of. It's like building a house upon the sand. You know, if your foundation is cracked and weak, everything you build on top of it doesn't matter how good a job you did, it's all going down the drain soon. They sanded right through the veneer here. That's a piece of finished veneer, and then you can see the kind of particle board gleaming through there where they burnt right through sanding. There's another look of where they burnt through. That's very, very difficult to camouflage without re-veneering that entire panel. We were able to do it though, and we got it to this. And this table goes to this with all of these insert leads to it. Very unique table, turned out beautiful, but we had to do some really tricky things to do it. I don't know what this green stripe is. I think I wrote on the screen. Are you guys seeing that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
anyway.
think you scratched the camera.
Pretend it's not there.
No, I'm kidding.
It's seemed to be following me.
Yeah.
Here's an old bracket from a bed and a brand new bracket that I had just finished minutes before. You can't tell which one's old, which one's new. So sometimes in the finishing world, the kindest thing to do, the most natural thing to a piece of furniture, is when you have to make a piece and you need to know your color work and your finishing work so well that you can only get in and get out of the piece that needed to be remade, instead of stripping and doing all this extra work and trauma to a piece. And so there's how color work can make you a little more bonded with the originality of an old piece. This is a gun stock that was dropped in the rifle stock, obviously before and after shot. Same again. Some pretty basic things here, just re-gluing some things back carefully. When we talk about bulletproof finishes, I've literally put it to the test. This was at a party nearby. Of course, we're in America where we shoot everything and everyone. But this was at a party where somebody decided to show off their pistol and put a 40 caliber hole through a rented table. And so we ended up trying to see if we could take a bullet out of a piece of wood, a bullet hole out of this, and get it pretty acceptable, which I think we did.
Did you paint that grain on?
Yeah, we did a lot of
painting. Hold on. And did you fill it in with ramen noodles?
No ramen noodles on this. We actually used a 2-part epoxy wood putty. It looks maybe kind of like in that underside before shot, like Bondo, but it actually isn't Bondo. And yes, once we get that applied and we get that surface prepped, we will actually what we call in painting or retouch the grain to emulate the grain around it, which is another place where finishing comes in to allow you to be really bonded with the natural wood. So again, when people talk about, oh, I don't like color work, I like to do it natural, it's not really true. If you get good at color work, you can keep things more natural. This is a big chunk that we had filled with some putty to consolidate the cracks, and this is what we ended up with afterwards to make it kind of disappear. And we were able to leave this piece natural and original because we could just get in and do the surgery right where the damage was and not have to like strip and refinish and lose all of the lovely patina that time gave it. Here's an example of a broken back splat. This thing's got 4 major crack areas in it. Almost not really repairable, but it is. That's afterwards. And yes, you see these 2 knot holes or knots that you didn't see here before. I decided to do that as a way of faux finishing a little bit of where the chunks had been blown out and were missing. And we're just never going to look like they weren't missing. We could have tried to do a blonde looking fill, but you would have seen it and it would have been very obvious that's what we did. So kind of taken from the Japanese concept of kintsugi, where they've got a broken piece of pottery, they put it back together, and in the cracks they don't try to make it invisible, they fill it with gold, where you embrace the journey and the trauma this item has been through, instead of trying to disguise it and hide it, which you'll probably fail at. you can kind of put your arms around damage sometimes and make it be part of the story. And in this case, we did that, but not with gold, but with pine knots. And so
that's a one. I like the thinking of this, of the piece becomes more precious for having been broken.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It truly is. It's now this is the one chair out of that set that has a cool, interesting story that they can tell. The
Right.
ones that weren't broken and looked pristine and new, boring.
Yeah.
So in other words, break your furniture, folks.
Yeah. Josh, I gonna let's take just a couple more minutes and then open it up to questions so that other people get a chance to ask.
Here's some examples of just various things.
We're gonna ask you to come back with more stuff in the future.
Again, in painting, before and afters, where we try to do burls. Burl is a little bit easier, believe it or not, than really light, boring, plain wood, because there's so much action going on. It gives you an opportunity to get in and make something.
It has brush strokes in it already.
Almost exactly that way. Yeah, good way of looking at it. Here is a chair that should have gone to the burn pile. Obviously, this is where a leg would have intersected here. There's the top of the leg. It's gone, guys. This is not the kind of thing you can repair, obviously. Wrong. There's all of our pieces. And this chair was very valuable to the client sentimentally. And they just knew there's no saving this. But I like to try. I put all the pieces back together like a puzzle, and we're missing a little bit, obviously. You can see some little small bits missing, and then this big chunk that's missing that we ended up working a piece down to make. And phase by phase, we were able to do this with it at the end, and that's looking straight down on it. And it's fairly passable. This is what you don't want to do to your chairs, Rusty.
Thank you.
No rusty screws. And I encounter this all the time because they had a friend that's a woodworker that did this. You know, everybody knows that guy. We call him all of them are named Uncle Charlie. If you're in the restoration world, the people who do this kind of work all get referred to as Uncle Charlie. So we all end up encountering Uncle Charlie's work all the time. This is an old bed that had some beautiful decorative pieces missing, broken away and totally missing. There's just no getting around that. That either is going to look like crap no matter what you do to the bed, or you're going to repair this and it'll look wonderful. So we molded, took castings of the original one like above and did a molding process of this element. And we did it of this element too. And we're able to use color theory and in paint these things to have a texture and a believable patina to where they really look pretty passable as originals. And you kind of ended up with this type of a bad deal.
Hold on, go back. Which one was broken? The top or the bottom?
You tell me.
I don't know.
The bottom one is the recreation that I made that I'm holding. The top one is still attached to the headboard.
I got you. Okay.
And then all of these little dudes on the posts were done. Here's metal that's rusted really bad on this steamer trunk. Oxidized. And it has really gone downhill. And there's a way to reverse this without using any abrasives or any paint. You see that shipping label that's still stuck to it from way back. That was very important to our clients. And there's zero paint been applied to this. We converted all of the metal that is rusted to black, natural with a natural chemical process. And so that is the same metal. That is, you're looking at the same rust that you are looking at here. There's nothing coated over that like an opaque coating or whatever. It literally turns rust to black, which happened to be the color we were looking for. If you were working on a white trunk, you're kind of not going to have that benefit. But here's some side by sides, two different sections that we applied that to, and we're able to reverse that rust. This is a piece we're working on right now. Veneer is a big part of what we deal with, maybe for a lot of you guys too. This is nice thicker veneer. This is an Italian made piece, and looks like a stack of books, and it's got burl pieces, just all sorts of cuts of burl all over it applied, and kind of a patchwork. It makes it very interesting, but the substrate started shrinking, as wood does, and shrinks at a different rate than the veneer oftentimes will do, especially when it gets to hard burl type things. So we're having this kind of issue all over this piece, where it's drawn up and expanded and causing fissures and cracks. And we're having to lift this with scalpels and small knives and inject with a syringe. And this is a good place to touch on one of the last important things I wanted to speak to you about, and that's adhesive selection. It pretty much doesn't matter what any of you do different from each other or from me. One thing that is probably going to be a common thread is we all will use adhesives, some or tons, in our work. Which ones do you choose? Which and why? We try to utilize as much hide glue as we possibly can in my shop. It's the finest adhesive known to mankind, bar none. And there's no, that was a full sentence, full stop. It's the finest adhesive ever known. It has the longest testing of any adhesive known to mankind. Items in the Egyptian tombs are still perfect, and they are obviously buried in very imperfect humidity and temperature shifts, and they're just fine. The adhesive is not giving up the ghost at all. In fact, they have still re-amalgamated the hide glue from these thousands of years old objects, reused the same hide glue, and rebonded the pieces back together without introducing any new hide glue to it at all. It still does that, 2,000 years later. So we use it as often as we can, but there's still places where it's just not the right thing. This is a place where we will be using, or are using, a lot of hide glue on these for veneer. I love it for veneer work. One thing is, when hide glue dries, the two parts are actually drawn closer and closer together. They have like a natural vacuum process. It's why you can do what is called a rub joint, which you guys probably know. You put a little bit of hide glue on two pieces, give them a few seconds to tack up, start rubbing them together, and eventually it just slows down and stops. You can't rub it anymore or move it anymore. That vacuum effect happens so fast. And that is a very, very valuable thing to us as woodworkers, trying to get two things to stick to one another. If the adhesive isn't just sticky goop, it actually creates a drawing of the two pieces together. So we'll use that a lot in veneer. It's reversible. Obviously, that's one of the most amazing things. There's not an undo button in much of crafts or handwork. Hide glue is probably the finest of undo buttons that I've ever found in the world, not just for this type of work. It is terrible to use if you want to gap fill. If you've got two pieces that just won't pull quite up, if there's chunks missing that you've got to consolidate, hide glue is not your man. It will fail on you in fairly short order. Obviously, if you were doing a lot of stuff in the jungle-like environments, which I kind of live in here in Atlanta, we have next level humidity. But the further into a humid environment that you go, or an item that's going to live exclusively outside in that environment, hide glue is probably not a good choice. I don't use very much PVA glue at all. I almost never, ever use Type Bond 2. Some of you guys just probably freaked out because that's a loved adhesive. I don't have any room for it. I don't know why it's there. I like Type Bond Original best of all the PVAs. It's got a very good reversibility. And if I need good water resistance, Titebond 3 is a good option, or an equivalent, a PVA with that thing. Titebond 2 falls between. It does have some extended drying time, but there's just not a real big reason to reach for it for me. I'm either needing the truly waterproof thing. I don't need it to be waterproof-ish. I don't know what environment that is. You either need it or you don't. Or I like the reversibility of just original yellow or plain white glue for wood glues. But I probably use PVA glues the least in all of the work that we do, of all types of adhesives. Number one would be hide glue. I love Old Brown pre-made liquid hide glue. I'm assuming that's available to most of you guys in the UK as well. Franklin makes one. I don't like it. Maybe it's as good. Maybe it's in my brain. I just don't like it. But those pre-made hide glues are pretty dang good for a lot of things. Love it for joinery. Any joinery work, that's what I'm reaching for. However, fractures where a piece is broken in half, or it is a damage has happened. It's not a joint that's come loose. That's usually not where I'm going to use hide glue. Sometimes those fractures create, like in that chair that was broken and apart in all those little pieces. As good as we got it back together, there was still some little gaps we needed to tighten up there. And hide glue wouldn't have been the thing to do there. Epoxy is your man for those situations. It is the most wonderful and durable gap filling adhesive that I'm aware of. They're not all the same. Usually the slowest drying ones are going to be your most durable. That being said, I oftentimes use the faster drying ones for certain little applications. 15-minute, 5-minute epoxy, that's really, really fast. By the time you get it mixed up, you better put it on flawlessly, get it in the clamp. You've got no time to blink, or things have kind of gone south on you. But we'll use the 15-30-minute type cure things a lot of times. We can do a phase, put it in clamps for 30 minutes, an hour, something like that, get it back out, come back and do yet another glue up to it. And we do just like a series of glue ups sometimes. But if it's a structural item, a chair leg that's been broken, it's going to get a lot of stress. We're going to probably go with the long lasting or the long slow cure epoxy. Not for joinery.
Epoxy, you can use the trans tint with as well.
You can absolutely color it.
Color it as well.
Yeah, and you can use trans tint with that, or powdered pigments even sometimes. You can get a nice invisible thing going on by pigmenting your epoxy to blend in with its surroundings. So any squeeze out, which is a lovely thing with the hide glue, your squeeze out or whatever cleans up beautifully. Just a wet cloth the next day, you can reactivate that hide glue on the surface, wipe it up carefully, and the joint stays perfectly bonded. Your mess is gone. However, hide glue that gets left behind, it can actually be fairly invisible when you put your finish on, where PVA is anything but invisible. Even just the hint of PVA residue there makes your finish look terrible. This can also be the case with epoxy. Epoxy is going to show you where you left it behind. But if you do color it, like Rusty brings up, that's another step in camouflaging issues. This is a segue here, and I'm going to close out, I think, after this. This is a piece of material we would normally consider not repairable. This is particle board. These are door panels made of particle board and that were then veneered on the outside surfaces. But this was made by a company called Knoll in the 60s, one of the still top of the food chain mid-century modern furniture companies. And this one was made when the founder and brilliant designer Florence Knoll was still alive. She made this piece, designed this piece, and so it was really important that these doors stayed original. Otherwise, it would be a no-brainer. We're just going to remake these doors. They've got some funky profiling there, you can see on that edge, but we would still opt for remaking these things. But it was a game changer because there was this provenance, originality that needed to be kept and maintained. but this is really not the kind of thing you want to get yourself involved in usually. But we used epoxy thinned, and we basically, and I hate this word, but it's the word you have to use, impregnated this wood with a thinned epoxy after we got the paint off the corner. That's the same corner you're seeing here, and it's in clamps, and it's being held up by a vacuum mount, my vac pad vacuum mount. Highly recommend those tools. If you don't know about them, ask me about them. I'll tell you about them. And we took a lot of readings to make sure we knew exactly the thickness that this door needed to be compressed to, so we could maintain. We didn't want to over squeeze it and them get thin and funky. We didn't need them to stay fat and poofed out either. So we made careful measurements and squeeze it till we got right there. Let that epoxy cure, and now those corners were far more bulletproof than any of the other areas. This picture's not out of focus. You may have to just move your head around your monitor a little bit to see these little divots, these little pock marks that are showing there in the paint, which is a very common thing you'll get in painted finishes, even in auto body. If you put down Bondo, you can sand Bondo really smooth, but you still get what is called pinholes. And because of this project being a very, made of particles, particle board, I knew I was going to have a problem when I wanted to get that perfect, pristine, baked on lacquer look. So after we primed it good and sanded it back, and we had all these little pinholes that I expected, I applied this blue substance, which is called icing. It's an auto body tool that I stole for the restoration world. And it's basically a really thin Bondo, and it will fill in all those really microscopic defects. And I'm able to sand that back now to this. And now you can see everywhere those little bitty tiny flecks of blue were, and we had something nicely finished out like this. And that is worth thousands of dollars, this box, believe it or not, many thousands of dollars. And a lot of those thousands came from the fact that those two doors are the original doors. So sometimes you have to jump through some hoops and repair things you just would not ordinarily repair. And you have to invent ways of doing that. There is no article in the back of any book on when you need to repair particle board doors. It's a no-brainer. You don't. You throw them away. It's junk, except for when it's not, So that's kind of, I think, the end. I could show you guys pictures and pictures of things we've done, but gorgeous piece there. But that actually is the end of the pictures. I hope that jarred something with some of you guys thinking about repairability, repair factor in what you're making. Kind of whet the appetite about color work, and not be afraid and just do, oh, I only put a clear thing on there. I do that too, but I don't just want to have my skill sets tell me that that's all I can do. I want to be able to do anything that comes my way and enhance the natural wood. You're kind of doing, a little mission with God, like there's the natural wood that was there, and there's what you want to do or what your client wants to do with it. And if you've got the skill sets to manipulate everything and problem solve everything, it's amazing how far you can go with it. So anyway, there's my kind of short spiel. That may have been boring as hell to you. I don't know.
Excellent. Well, we're going to open it up to questions. So if people want to ask questions, put your names in the chat. And I think, Scott, were you going to do this part?
Yeah, I can control the next bit from here if you want.
Thank you.
Just switch off your screen share, Joshua, then I can go back to people and highlight them. There we go. Thank you for that, Joshua. That was amazing. I think it's way out my depth when it comes to restoration. It's not something I've got a specialty in at all. But that was amazing. I loved that. So if anyone's got any questions for Joshua, now's the time to stick your name in the chat. And I will go through you and highlight you. Rusty, I
think Matthias was the first one to put his name down.
I'm just going to take you off spotlight, Rusty, okay?
Oh, thank God, that's better.
So yeah, we've got some names in the chat already, and I need to go to participants and then add spotlight. There we go. There's Matthew. So, evening, Matthew.
Evening. So, thank you very much, Joshua. That was extremely interesting. Part of the problem now is you've already answered about 85% of the questions I was planning to ask you.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
well,
so,
I mean, make up something else. How's the weather there?
Hot but nice. But anyway, no, two things. The first one is, so you talked quite a lot about preferred, and if we take this from the woodworker's perspective, so I'm making things, I'm making new projects, I'm gonna glue them together and I'm gonna finish them. And while I think most of what you said actually tallies pretty well with my usual choices, I like old brown or type 1-3 or 30 to 60 minute epoxy are my sort of go-to. What would be your please don't do this finishes and adhesives from the restorer's point of view?
I don't know what the if it's available in your area or not, but there is an adhesive that we see a lot of people swearing by is Gorilla Glue here in the States.
Yeah, we can get it as well. I've never tried it, but we can get it.
Try it one day, and then try it very close to your garbage can, because that's probably where you'll decide you want to put it. It's not allowed in any of my shops. I've told everybody that works with me, don't bring it on the property. Don't wear a T-shirt that says you like Gorilla Glue. I hate it. I don't like anything about it. It basically is it foams up. It is activated, enhanced more with water. You don't have to get it moist, but it really expands. It reminds me a lot of like the expanding foam insulating things that you can use it in correct.
A polyurethane thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think it is a polyurethane based glue that expands. Now, I will say that probably maybe the most authoritative figure on adhesives, I mean on veneers, a guy, I'm terrible, I'm turning into my father, I think his name's Craig Thibodeau. I think Craig something. He uses it exclusively in his veneer. That's exactly where I don't want to use it, because it kind of pushes things apart more. But Craig's got a way of using it that he loves. He completely understands why most people hate it for that application, and why people that like me hate it for any application. But we've done some tensile strength tests on it, or others have, and it just doesn't hold up well in the strength test. There's an awful lot of air introduced into the cured sections of this adhesive, and air is not really what I'm looking for a strong bond. So that is the one adhesive that I dislike the most. Finishes that I don't really care for, or finishes that I can't manipulate in any way, that I just basically have to take a chisel to get it off or something, or sand it off. I don't use a lot of varnish for the reason, one, it is a pain to work with if you have to kind of remove it. Although there is a repair factor with varnishes you can do. Sometimes you can just do some abrading and then apply a new coat. So in that part of it, some varnishes, especially modified tung oil varnishes, they do have a nice repair factor to them. I don't care for varnish uses because of the really slow dry time, and that allows for dust and flying insects to land in it, and it also means that I'm not getting very much done that week, because we're waiting for 8 to 10 hours for every single coat, and I want to be able to do several coats in 8 to 10 hours. So that's my main reason I don't utilize that. But I'm not a big fan of some of these big bulletproof finishes for the same reasons I was mentioning, that I don't use conversion varnish. There's a lot of good people that do some really killer work, and they just use conversion varnish. There's some compelling reasons for it. But in my world, where I'm mainly doing furnishings and decorative items, I don't find that if you behave like a civilized human being at the dining table, that you're probably going to do things to the tabletop that requires a level of armor beyond, say, a pre-cat or post-cat lacquer.
Yeah.
If you did damage that doing something, you know, you probably, it was a hooker and an 8 ball kind of night. You're tap dancing on your table or something you're not supposed to be doing. I mean, regular use of most of these furnishings just doesn't require that kind of durability. So the fact that the engineers can come up with it and chemists can come up with it and say it's even stronger than the one before. Okay, but why? Why do I care? Like, if my clients are that hard on their furniture, I'm glad it got screwed up because now I get to redo it. You know, so like, there's a certain place where I have to draw the line and say, yeah, but do I really want to be able to park my truck on top of the dining room table? Like, how valuable is that to me? You know, it's neat that chemistry can do it, but it just doesn't appeal to me because I want to, what is important to me, not doing those kinds of things, but being able to work with the finish afterwards, repair it. These types of things, those are valuable to me. So I lean more towards the older things. The oldest of finishes, though, is and a lot of people love this, is an oiled finish. And a lot of mid-century pieces have this, and it looks beautiful. Oil and certainly wax, oil and wax together. These are beautiful finishes, and there's a lot of pieces that have endured a long time with that. However, they are some of the least protective finishes you can reach for. There's no film thickness, which is part of the love of it. You get that tactile feel of the wood. If it's a decorative item, maybe some carving, it's real easy to apply these types of things, oil finishes over profiles and carvings and stuff. And you get a little bit of sheen. Maybe if you use the colored oil, you get a little color pop. And it can be a really appropriate thing for things like clocks or mantelpieces or decorative items. But for a tabletop or something that's going to get pretty regular use, it's a pretty weak protective coating. So you always think about the finishes from two perspectives: how it's going to be used, the item's going to be used, and what it's going to look like. It's an aesthetic thing and it's a performative thing. And and so I change, like for this, I might hate this finish for this type of an object, but I love it for another type of an object. I don't ever want to do oil finishes on a dining table, probably, but I love applying them. They're the easiest thing. I feel almost guilty charging for it because it's just so much easier than a lot of, you kind of have to work to screw them up. It's a great entry place to getting a pretty decent look out of a finish. When you're scared and not knowing, like you go in the store and there's a billion different choices. An oil finish is always a simple way to go to get some mileage. You put a little wax over that, and you got a little more protection still. But those are the kind of things that I try not to, as opinionated as I am, and I know you guys are picking up on that. I try to back it up with the reasoning. But I try not to hate anything. And this is an important concept that in finishing classes that I teach. There are no bad. I don't mean there's no bad questions or you can't be stupid. People are inherently stupid, it seems, but there are no bad situations. There just are realities. If you do a thing and it created an end result on your project that you weren't wanting, that doesn't necessarily mean never ever do that thing again. Store that information that you learned, because later in another project you may be trying to create that exact end result, and now you know how to do that. And I find that's
a very good point.
And with finishes, you're kind of manipulating chemistry with substrates. That can be more the case than just about anything, where this finish behaves this way, and you're thinking, well, that's terrible, I don't want that. You don't want it for this particular thing right now, but another project, that may be exactly what you need to get your desired thing to happen. And you've remembered, that wasn't a bad thing. It was just a fact of life. And now I know how to dial that right back up and create that. So that's why I try to preach, don't hate a finish or a result that you get. Just embrace it for what it is and how it happened, and then control it.
Thank you very much. My second question, if it's okay with everybody else, I hope I'm not taking up too much time, but
I grant you permission.
Thank you.
They said I could do that.
Yeah. So talking about hating things, how do you feel about instant patination of new pieces? So one thing is, you have something that's 200 years old. It will have proper genuine patina, which is basically grease and dirt from 200 years that has accumulated in corners and places that you didn't touch as much. And you see a number of newly made pieces where people try to recreate that effect instantaneously.
Almost like the distressing trend and
distressing, exactly, or where you put shading in all the corners and that kind of stuff.
There's not a single answer for that to me.
No.
And it kind of comes from the same philosophy of what I just was speaking about.
Yeah.
There is a time and a place for all of that. I showed in those photographs two brackets that I had made for a bed. One was like about a century old. The other one was brand new. They looked equally the same in most respects.
But that's different, because that is trying to fit a new piece into coherence with an old piece. I'm
Correct.
talking about an entirely new piece.
Yeah. So I like being able to have those techniques and skill sets to use it in that way. When I need to make a piece or a part for an overall piece and it look believable. And it's really fun. It's a lot of fun. I probably watch more art videos and stuff on prop making and set dressing. My city, Atlanta, is now the new Hollywood, and there's a lot of friends I have that work in that respect, and I love the little tricks and material manipulation things that they do to get those effects. So it's a lot of fun. It's a whole lot of fun to create dusty corners on a brand new piece. However, my big problem, I guess, with the thing that you're asking about is when there's a bit of kind of fraudulent representation of a piece. And this happens a lot where a piece is supposed to be X number of years old, or come from this castle, or this duke slept on it and all that. And it's like, it's 30 days old, they built this last summer, and I of course hate that. Like when we work on a lot of what I do is restoration, and that's different than conservation.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so a lot of guys get that confused, but when we are doing conservation works where we're truly trying to keep a piece in that conservation realm for a museum or historical society, I put on a totally different cap and think of it and approach everything very differently. I don't want to do anything that could be misrepresented as making a part seem like it's article. We want to make every part of this thing seem the genuine article, and we want to not hide, even from close examination, it looking like it's all the same as it ever was. There's an old rule of thumb in that world. It's called the 6 foot 6 inch rule. From 6 inches away, you should be able to identify the work that I've done on a piece. From 6 feet away, it should look pretty coherent with everything else. And that's to keep the problem that you're talking about from happening, where sometimes I'm trying to I'm showing those after shots where things look relatively invisible. From an aesthetic standpoint, that's a lovely thing to do, and certainly if it's just for a private client, that's great. But if it is a genuine historic article or something of that kind of value, we don't necessarily want to do that. We want to stabilize the thing from further damage, but not restore it to a previous look that it had once in its life. It's okay that it looks jacked up a little bit, because like that broken chair back, Rusty made the comment of, this piece has a story now. It's like, well, obviously these pieces had a story, is why they're in a museum. So we don't want to do anything to detract from that. So I like it. These practices at times. I like the guys that do period reproductions, and they make it clear on the bottom side, this was made in 2000 and whatever by this person. But when it's sitting upright and you're looking at it, you can't tell that it's not 400 years old. But those guys that are proud of their skill sets are also proud enough to say on the bottom, I got you. You thought this was 400 years old, but when you read the tag underneath, I'm all too happy to say, surprise, I just made this. That's kind of a cool thing, to be able to make somebody think, hey, yeah, this is 600 years old. But then you pull the curtain back and you're willing to show them. It's the guys that don't ever want to pull the curtain back and act like, no, it really is that old, and you really should pay me this kind of money. And that comes more from the dealers, antique dealers and stuff. A lot of that world's cooled off a lot, though. The antique dealer world isn't what it used to be. And so you don't have as much of that fraudulent, make this piece look like it was really old, and let's make up some fake story that we can sell this for more for. Most of the time in my world, at least, I don't get somebody asking me to do that. I've had a few people ask me to do some things like that I can't be a part of that, No. So I hope that answered it.
Oh,
it's really fun stuff to get into and
manipulate. I could probably have talked to you for another 45 minutes about that subject, but there are people in queue to ask more questions. So I'm going to shut up now and get out of their way.
And where were you from? Where are you today?
Today I'm in France, but I live in Belgium.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate your time and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Matthias. Sean, it's over to you.
He can't ask questions, can he?
Sean,
he's allowed? I thought he was on restriction. All right, go ahead.
I won't do it again, I promise.
Okay.
I like shellac, but I know next to nothing about shellac. I've used it to refinish knobs on plane handles and that kind of thing. I believe from us talking once before that you are largely self-taught, and I'm wondering if someone wanted to learn how to French polish properly, or how to mix their own and the very, very basics, where would you point them? What would be the resources that you'd point people at?
That's a very good question. There is, I'm having one of those father moments with trying to recall a name again.
There's a name I hear a lot in finishing circles. I've never read any of his stuff. Flexner.
Yeah, Bob Flexner. He's an American guy. If you can find any information from Bob Flexner, it's very reliable information. He and I differ on minor things that we like to, elbow each other about, and that's healthy and good. But Bob is a wealth of information. If he says it, there is at least 99% truth, and he's tested it and can back it up and show you. His books are very well written. Understanding Wood Finishing. It's probably backwards, but it says Understanding Wood Finishing by Bob Flexner. This is a book. I teach from this book when I do finishing courses, because it at the beginning, it starts really with some really basic concepts, and it goes into some more advanced things that you might get into. My copy, this is probably my third copy, and it's all beat up like a missionary's Bible or something, but it is a really solid book. He covers a lot of different things, and he's got a few different books about if you want to really get into a rabbit hole on this or that. But that's an excellent resource. That's a great question. You guys should be able to get that book off of Amazon or something, probably worldwide.
I'll be on Amazon tonight to snag a copy. Thank you very much.
I don't know if it's available in Braille or not for you blind woodworkers, but maybe one day you guys could read it to each other. But it's an excellent book for even the guys that do want to resist what I'm telling you about color work, and you just want to do it all in the natural and all that. That's fine. Read this book and learn a bit about these clear finishes that you're going to work with, and find the one that's really good for you. I stress everybody start and get fairly proficient with shellac, and but you don't have to start there. Just don't eliminate it. If it gets frustrating for you, don't hang it up. Stay with it, and it will pay back dividends, even if you're using other finishes primarily. The shellac world is a great thing. And I will tell you, you can buy pre-made shellac. There's only one manufacturer of pre-made shellac in America. And you wouldn't believe that, but that is the actual truth. It's okay. It's not bad to use. It's what we use for sealer coats when we're spraying finishes, and when we need that barrier coat I spoke about. But there is no close second at all to making your own shellac from flakes. And you can find somebody in your area or that will ship to you that is getting it from flakes. If you don't know, it's a secretion from, it's not an excretion. One is, you know, they're very different. You know, basically you're comparing the bathroom to sweating. And so it's a secretion from the female lac beetle, and they leave these little deposits on certain tree leaves, and these villagers doing it exactly the same way they did 600 to 800 years ago, go with these baskets and rake it all off. They don't have machinery doing this. They take it back to a hut and they heat it up and they melt it and they stretch it. There's videos you can find on YouTube of this entire process. And it's not the way National Geographic filmed it way, way, way back. It's exactly how it's still happening. And they shatter some of it. They stretch some of it. They do all kinds of different things. But it's a wonderful process to watch and learn about. It's very interesting stuff. But there's so many different types of shellac that you can get. It's not just color changes. Like I spoke about the orange shellac. There are totally different types of shellac that will behave differently, that dry harder than other types. Some are good for French polishing, some are not that great, some are good for all different types of things. So research your suppliers, find out what they have in your area, and then go back before you buy it, research those types that are available to you and decide, oh, this one does this one's good for this. And then, you know, grab you a bag, mix it with some alcohol. I actually mix it with golden grain liquor here. That's the best thing. I go to my liquor store. Most of the denatured alcohol or meths, as you guys get it in, it's usually purple, I'm assuming. Here it's still clear, but they keep adding more and more water and other things to it that make it cheaper for them to sell to us and make it worse for us to use. And you just can't really do better than just pure grain alcohol, or pachine in your case. Mix that, take a swig, mix that, take a swig, and you won't even know if you've got a bad finish or not. That's the beautiful part of it. It really does dissolve lovely in that, and it's pure, and it's a lovely thing to work with. You get a better tactile feel if you start doing a little French polish work or brush work with it. Try the pre-made, get you a quart of that, and then try this other stuff, and you will realize even when you get it basically to the same viscosity, there's a different tactile feel to it. It's like rubbing linen and rubbing silk. They're both fabrics, but they're so different in the hands, and shellac from one shellac to another can do that. So did I answer your question at all?
That and so much more. Thank you very much, Joshua. That was fantastic.
Thanks, Sean. Over to you, Roger. You need to unmute, Roger. Sorry.
Is that better?
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah. I thought Sean was going to steal my thunder now, because I've got a question about shellac.
Okay.
You mentioned you use mostly orange shellac. In the UK, we tend to use, well, I do, mostly blonde shellac or button shellac. Yep. Because that's what
I don't mostly use orange shellac. most of probably what I use is what you're describing as blonde or a button shellac. I use that more than anything because a lot of times I'm not introducing color in my shellac phase. I'm either putting the clear shellac over some color work I've already done in another way, or I'm not after changing the color at all to a piece and I just want a shellac finish. So I probably more than anything use a blonde or and blonde shellac, for you guys that haven't experimented with it much, it's not what you might think of as, well, there's orange shellac and so blonde must mean it's pretty yellow in its finish. It's really not. It's very clear. And there's super blonde, which just means she's well endowed. You know, blonde shellac is actually just is clear, and super blonde is even clearer. I believe I have that correct. And so there's not really much of an amber or golden hue in either of those options. You get into the color when you get into orange shellac, or then when you get into some of the
shellac.
Pardon?
Button shellac gives you that sort of browny.
Yeah, you'll get that dark reddish brown kind of rust flavor, which is lovely, lovely stuff. You can get some amazing color out of those colored shellacs. And again, these are not color additives to your shellac. The flakes, the natural flakes that are made are this color. And you dissolve those shards of shellac that are that color, and it just liquefies into that color. So it's not an a pigment that's been added to these things, for you guys that don't understand that. So that means you get color, but you get it in the highest clarity you can get. There's nothing opaque in the color process when you get colored that way, and it can be a really beautiful thing, especially if you're working with like some flame mahogany or some really figured maple or walnut. You don't want to obscure that like with a pigmented stain can do. Dyes do it a whole lot less, and then these colored shellacs even less still.
The other thing I was going to ask about, you've got a really glossy mirror finish on a lot of things. We tend to like going that glossy. What's your processing getting?
Where are you at, Roger?
I'm in the UK.
So that's funny, because usually when I'm talking to a client about sheen and what sheen they would like a piece to end up at, one of the first thing I explain is how high gloss really never took off in America like it did in the UK. UK is actually where that formal thing came from originally. Now, that may have since diminished and people have calmed down and don't go for that high style as much. There's always exceptions in America too, where it's been used and is used. But by and large, the sheen that is most requested from me is what would be considered a satin sheen, or by a finisher's perspective, a 40-degree sheen. If you look at a lot of finishes, they'll call it out in numeric terms, 40-degree. Jeffrey is holding up something. I guess that's a 40-degree, or I can't see it real well in the small pictures, but that is a signal. That's beautiful stuff.
Yeah, sorry, this is a Madrone. So
gorgeous.
I try and get I'm inside now, so the light's not so clever, but if you can just about see. Yeah. It's almost 3D like, but it's actually smooth. But this is a shellac finish.
Yeah. Lovely. Lovely stuff. That chatoyance on that high figure is so lovely, and it's a wonderful finish to use on. Man, that's so velvety. It does play mind tricks with you when you get that high chatoyance. And I've actually done photos and videos where I lay a straight edge on the piece, because it really makes the viewer think it's lumpy and it's perfectly flat. And I'll lay a straight edge on there and everybody's like, whoa. Yeah. But one of the great things to keep that intact is shellac, because it enhances that chatoyance so much better than a lot of finishes, because it has that really, really high clarity.
You use a lot of burnishing cream to get it.
I don't do a lot of that. I've played around with the old French polishing technique, and maybe I'll share this with you guys another time. I don't have a so a good show and tell thing lined up. Rusty asked me about, oh, if you got some cool tools to show, I got to keep you guys wanting more. So I'm getting paid a lot of money to do these. So I want to come back again and do it. There's an old thing where basically you have a bundle of straws and they're cut flat. And for waxing, this is the original French polish, believe it or not. It wasn't done with a polissoir or a rubber. It was done with this bundle of like broom bristles, and they're blunt cut flat. And you would dip that into molten wax, and you would start burnishing your finishes with that in a figure of 8 or whatever pattern. And you're basically burnishing the wood as the friction heat is melting that wax and infusing it a little bit at a time. And that was pre-shellac. That was just a wax French polish approach. And so that did both. I've done that. It's a lot of work. I'm getting old for that kind of thing, but it's cool to like play around with it on a small thing. About the size of that piece Jeffrey showed us is about as far as I want to go on something like that. But it's a really cool thing to do some of that kind of thing. There is a company here in America. They're on YouTube. I don't know if they'll ship to the UK or not. They may. It kind of for a long time, the companion or the other current father of finishing advice to Bob Flexner that I mentioned was a guy named Jeff Jewett. And he really was one of the first guys to preach hardcore about waterborne finishes. Now, Jeff Jewett is now the owner and maker of Jewett guitars, and he does really amazing acoustic instruments. But he sells under the name Homestead Finishes, and he is the guy who invented Trans Tint and Trans Fast, the pigmented version. But he sells the Homestead Finishes is a store on YouTube, or sorry, not YouTube, on eBay. And if you go to look for Homestead Finishes on eBay, they may ship to the UK. He has a product that's called Shellac Flat. And it is an additive, a flattening agent specifically made for shellac. So if you were trying to, in my case, touch up shellac to an old piece that didn't have much luster left, and you want that really dialed back sheen, while you can go over it and burnish it with, wire wool and some things to knock that sheen down, it's really lovely if you can just mix in that flattening agent to your shellac, and it comes out the sheen you wanted when it dries and you're done with that part of it. So that is a great way to get the best of both worlds, that lower sheen, and you can mix it up in different ratios to get it really, really flat or just a subtly flat. But you can still work in the shellac domain and not be having to stuck with a higher sheen or having to just wire wheel everything afterwards, or wire wool, not a wheel. Does that answer you about?
Yeah, that does. I hadn't heard of that flattening before.
Yeah, and that's the only company that I know of that offers a specific shellac flattening paste. And I've had mine for a long time. It's got a pretty good shelf life to it. And I actually asked Jeff, I don't know, about a month or so ago, I was like, what kind of shelf life does this have? And he said, if it's not coming out clumpy, you're fine. And it wasn't. So it's like, man, this stuff has got killer shelf life. So if you can get it, try it. It's a fun thing to play with. If you do end up following me on Instagram, you may see a post where I did a before and after of just shellac at full sheen, and the exact same thing with the shellac flat added side by side. And you can kind of see, man, it's a very pronounced difference.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your question, Roger.
Excellent. Thank you, Roger. Brilliant. Evening, Phil, over to you.
Hey, Phil.
Hi there. Before we do we miss Rusty? Did we skip Rusty?
Rusty said to move on. He might come back.
Okay, fine. He's not feeling upset. Right. Just to start, say thank you very much. That was interesting throughout, and it was entertaining as well. It made me think about some things I've heard a little bit about before. I make furniture, and I'm totally unoffended by anything you've said. So we're
wonderful.
Good. We're good.
Well, good.
But things like, I'm a shellac fan, but re-amalgamating a partially deteriorated finish. I think I'd heard about that, but it's good to get it back in the mind. And I guess the question I'd have would be on the color match. You've mentioned cherry. Yes, it's a problem. It varies. If you were, okay, so I'm building new pieces in cherry. If you were doing that, would you try and target the specific areas that are perhaps a little pale, a bit sappy? Or would you do that and hit the whole thing to try and even it out?
Great question. Great
question. Is it
question.
possible to target, or do you have to do the whole thing plus the target?
Okay. It is possible to do both. What you're talking about, and hopefully everybody understood, he's talking about sapwood being a different color, a lighter color usually than your main heartwood that you're working with, and cherry is notorious for that. And how do you blend that and give it a continuity in the finish domain? The process is called sap stain, and this became extremely critical for furniture manufacturing shops because they didn't have the option or the luxury of just culling out truckloads of cherry to throw away. They had to use what they have to use, and so they would cut it all out of everything, but yet each piece had to look consistent to the next. So they started with a sap stain, and this kind of is in the world of toners, and toners are basically very semi-transparent stains. You can make your own toner with any type of finish you're working with. If you're working with lacquer, you can take a little bit of colorant and put it into your lacquer. You apply a coat, and it's just a breath of color added. Sometimes that's what you wanted, sometimes it's not. If you need more, you don't do anything more than do a second light coat, and now you've doubled the intensity of that very breathy toner. We do this all the time, where we'll put our colorant into the lacquer or the finish that we're working with and make this toner. And while we're building up coats of our clear coat, we're also building up depth of color too. And if we get to the color we were after, but we still have more coats of finish we wanted to apply, we get to our color saying 2 coats of that, but we wanted to put 3-4 coats of finish on. We just stop with the toner, flip back over to the clear, and do the 3rd and the 4th coat in clear. But those areas or the entire thing, whatever you might want to do, it got built up with those toner coats in the first and second time. This is a very helpful thing if you do something with color and it turns out a little too green. Well, the opposite of green, and this is very more often the case, things are a little too red, and we need to knock that red down. It's a little bit too rich and syrupy. The opposite on the color wheel, the complementary color to red is green. So I will actually add some green into that finish, not add brown. I want it browner, not red. But if I add brown, I'm just muddying what's already there. So instead, now I'll add a little bit of green in there. And when I'm applying that, it neutralizes a little bit of the red. It doesn't make it look green like the shirt you're wearing. It just makes it look less red. And it's amazing how certain colors can eat the other color to the eye. And it's complementary colors that do that. So that's a kind of a toner trick, but in that it is very kind of kissing cousins to sap stain. So where you've got those yellow streaks running through there, I might mix a light toner, because you want to sneak up on the color. Usually that's how I like to do it, because there's no good undo. You can't, if you have to undo, you're undoing all of it. You're starting back with naked wood again, stripping it all back. You can't just take the top coat off, you take them all off. So if you ease up on it or sneak up on the color, I'll do a light pass with that toner color just on my sapwood, and it starts evening pretty close to that heartwood that I was after. And I decide, did I get it in that first coat? Probably not, because I'm going to mix it light and be a little error on the side of safety. And so I'll do it a second time. Now I need to make the decision. How did that, does that even things out pretty well? If it did, then I could stop, and I have my choice at that point. depending upon what you're after. And this is where you started with the question. I can then say, okay, the heartwood and the sapwood are pretty even now, acceptably even. I switch over to clear coats, put a few clear coats on there, and I'm done. Or I even everything out, but that's not the end color that I want to live with. They're even. The heartwood, I wasn't trying to change. That was the target that I was wanting to start with. But these sapwood sections were way paler. So I even everything out to now it looks just like one slab of raw wood. But I want that to be a little more whatever.
Yeah.
Now I will go on and do everything, sapwood and heartwood, with this other thing that I wanted to do all along to begin with, and then I finish it on out. So that's where you can just do the targeted areas and stop and then do your clear coat on everything else, or you can do the targeted areas and then come back and do everything with even more. Does that answer that?
It does. And just to confirm, so you are able, one should be able to just target those sap areas to level them, or you will then take them both together. But you level them first and then move them on together.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would not try to push the heartwood all the way to the finish line on its own, and then push those all the way on to the finish line on their own necessarily.
Yeah.
That's
good. Cool.
All right.
Thanks again. That was interesting throughout. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that question. That's a wonderful question, actually, for keeping things very believable and natural, but yet using a little bit of color technique to maintain that natural believability.
I'll go and dig out the stains I have, see what works.
There you go. All right, Eric.
Okay. Hi, Josh. Thanks very much. That's been fascinating. It's I always think this when I'm on Bench Talk 101, it's every night a school night, but particularly so tonight. I don't know much about restoration at all. But I feel I know a good bit more now. But you've maybe covered this because I've had a lot of sort of technical problems tonight. It kept sort of hanging on me, but. If you're using, you're looking for denatured alcohol for to dilute your shellac. The stuff we've got that's readily available here is the sort of purple stuff. If you use that, is it going to tinge your wood purple?
The denatured alcohol being purple, will it enhance? It would change the color. It's a great question, and it's a question everybody should ask, really. And the answer is no.
Right.
How that is, I cannot comment on. I don't have the chemistry to tell you that. We don't have our denatured alcohols are just as clear as they would have been if they were drinkable. The only reason for the coloring, and there are some countries that have done other than purple. I've seen green or a bluish thing in some cases, but nearly all of the UK is doing a purple. And that is totally diminished in when you start enhancing it with color. I don't know why or how that works, but it is visible when it's in the clear domain, and when you start applying it. If you just took it and applied it on a piece of holly that's pretty light or something like that, you won't, once it dries, go, well, now it looks a little bit purple. It actually won't do that. So when it evaporates, the colorant is basically dissipated in that process.
Right. All right. Now, I sort of suspected that because I know if you're using it, I've only ever really used it as what we call methylated spirits. I've only ever really used that for sort of cleaning things, and trying to take glue off and stuff. But at the end of the day, your cloth still looks exactly the same. So it does seem to sort of disappear. And I wondered if that was the case, because I've got as far as buying some shellac flakes, but I haven't taken the next step of actually making them up and doing anything with them yet.
And to answer a little bit further of what you were just saying, that's why I usually use, I will go to the liquor store and buy grain alcohol to mix with when I'm making true shellac from flakes. That's what I prefer to do. And it's just a better, purer alcohol than a lot of times what you'll get as methylated spirits, because those companies are trying to make it as cheaply as they can, and it's wonderful for cleanup and doing the things like you're talking about, we certainly keep it around for those things. I will actually save my whether it's denatured alcohol or lacquer thinner or whatever, I will reuse that. I strain it several times and reuse that just for cleaning things. I don't want to use that in a virgin mix batch of finish that I'm making, but I will reuse that for cleaning solvent. And you can even buy it as, in some finishing shops, cleaning solvent, and it's reconstituted solvents for just cleaning purposes. You would not want to use that in your quality finishing. And so I keep it for those reasons, but I usually, when it comes down to doing some French polishing or making shellac from flakes, I like the pure like golden grain is what we have. So
all right, I'll look out for that.
Yeah, Eric, I've never used vodka, but I have managed to get high purity meths without color in it. I've just posted a link on that too.
Oh, right.
As Josh said, I save that for mixing shellac, and I still clean up with the purple stuff.
Oh, right. Okay. No, I'll try that out. Thanks.
You bet.
Okay. Yep. That's me, Josh. That was really all I was wanting to know. Most of my other questions have already been answered by others.
Well, thanks for your question, Eric.
Cheers.
Thanks, Eric.
Chester, you're up.
Joshua, very good presentation. I appreciated a lot of the things that you said. I'm a woodworker and a refinisher and a restorer, and I do a lot of museum restoration. So I was interested in listening to what you had to say to see how you covered all those different aspects. And I just wanted to say that I was getting a little anxious halfway through, worried that you were spending so much time on certain things. But you actually did finally come around to certain things that I thought were important. And so I just wanted to point some of those out, which was first the idea of you putting on a different mindset depending on the piece of furniture, because no piece of furniture is the same unless you're working in a factory and you're shoving 300 desks through and you're trying to color them the same. I think that was a very good point. And in particular with historic pieces and museum pieces, you have to take a separate approach
no question.
To those pieces to maintain not only their real value, but their historic value. So I was really glad to hear you mention that. I also laughed when you mentioned your differences with Bob Flexner, because I've got a whole set of letters between he and I from say 25 years ago, where I was disputing some of the things that he had said in his article in Fine Woodworking, because he used to have a column where you could ask him questions and then he would answer questions, and oftentimes he was very good. But on that, I wanted to mention a man named George Frank, and
I almost made a point to have George Frank on the ready for recommending. I'm so grateful that you just did that for me.
Well, yeah, because he was born around 1908 in Hungary, and he opened his shop in France, and he really popularized the constructs of wood finishing, and he was a contributor also to Fine Woodworking, and he really did. There you go. Yeah, I might have an older book, but
this is called Wood Finishing with George Frank. If George Frank is mentioned in it, or certainly the author guys, listen to what Chester's saying. This guy is probably my favorite source on finishing knowledge. This is my favorite finishing book ever. It's only this thick.
Is that Adventures?
Yes, Adventures in Wood Finishing.
Mine still has a cover.
I have the cover too, but I've taken it off. But
yeah,
this is George. You could hate finishing and enjoy this book. You could never want to have a wet brush or do any woodworking or wood finishing ever, and you would enjoy this book. My mother would get a kick out of this book. It really, the first word, adventures, is no lie. He tells some of the most outlandish stories you will ever hear, and how it translates to his world of becoming in pursuing professional finishing, and the things that they were experimenting and inventing and dragging out of old hand-me-down recipes and keeping alive. And like Chester mentioned, his age, he was around at the time where he was young, and goes back old enough in time to where these really old finishers were still there doing it all the wrong ways, but it was so beautiful what they did. You know, they just did it, made it up. And I think he worked in like a almost like a slaughterhouse or a pigsty or something at one point. It was the most workshop place to work, but yet they were doing these pristine finishes that we can't figure out how they did because we're so addicted to rules and things. Yeah. But yes, I'm so glad. And again, guys, George Frank, Chester, thank you for bringing him up. He's a brilliant, or he's passed on now, but you can still find some videos of interviews with him and stuff. Really, really great man.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I'm glad you agree with me on that. The other thing I wanted to quickly mention was that, and I've never spoken to you before, so I don't know if you know, but I've been in the film business for over 40 years, and so I've, as a prop master and an art director, so I've worked with a lot of prop houses and different things, and I just wanted to share with you, when I was in Rome doing a movie, I went to a Postiglione prop house, which is probably the size of a large department store in the States. And on every floor, they had different furniture dating back all the way back to Cleopatra, you know, some of those older movies. But they had these Italian craftsmen that were amazing at doing French polish work. And all of these pieces that they were producing were probably 200, 300, some of them 500 years old, actual pieces that they would rent out to movies to use, but they maintained them properly to museum specifications. And some of the old masters that I got to work there, I'm talking about in their 80s and 90s, were still working on tables and things there and showing you how to do French polish and how to do to your wrist and the workmanship. Because a lot of times I hear people talking about, well, I restored this plane handle and I used a French polish. Just because you use a shellac does not mean you're using a French polish. A French polish is a technique as opposed to a product. The product. Yeah.
They do sell products labeled as French polish, and it's basically a shellac that has the viscosity thin to French polishing ideal French polishing thing. But yes, Chester, that's a great example. You guys will see that when you are in the shops. You can buy a jug of French polish, and you can put that on with a sprayer or a brush or anything you want to, but that's not the act of French polishing, which is a technique.
And so I think that one of the biggest things, one of the best things out of your presentation, and I commend you on it, I think you did a really great job, but was the pointing out, into my eyes, that every job is different. Everything you look at from your end point of view. What do you want it to become? Are you making something for your grandchildren completely whole? Is it something a child's going to chew on? What finish could you use for that? Do you want it to look like an antique, but put your name? I like that you talk about that. I always sign my pieces, even though I've done Chippendale ribbon-back chairs to match a set that they wanted an extra one, and I carved the whole thing, but I put my name on the bottom and my date, so they know this chair is not really a match for them, but I had to match the finish.
Sure.
You know, and and so I think that's a big thing, is that there are 1,000 different thought processes you have to go through with every project, and you start with the end where you want it to be
and work back,
and then you bring it back and start making that piece. But anyway, thank you. My commendations.
Thank you for your comments, Chester. That was great. I'm so glad that you squeeze George Frank's name. Anytime anybody gather together and bring up the topic of finishing, George Frank's name should pass somebody's lips. He was really that unique of a gentleman. And he wasn't just there was a million George Franks out there, but George took it upon himself to educate the masses about these things and to speak on it and write on it. And so he, without some of George's lessons, a lot of these things would have fallen by the wayside. Like the gentleman that you got a chance to work with in Rome, those guys didn't write books, and so we don't know what they knew. Right. Unless somebody like George did it. And so that's a great thing. But yeah, that's a wonderful thing that you're kind of magnifying that we spoke on earlier, is the guys thinking about the end as being your start. And that's why I was talking about the storyboards. Start with the way this is going to look right from the end, and that will tell you right where you need to start. You thought you were going to prep your wood ready for finish this way, but you end up doing your storyboards and you find out, oh, you're going to need to do a little different or a little more. The end is always the beginning when it comes, and that's why we call it finishing. That's what you're going to finish with, and it will tell you everything. So that will be different for every piece, based on the way it was built, based on the kind of wood it is, based on how it's going to be used, based on what do you want it to look like. So great.
Joshua, let me real quick ask you one more question.
Sure.
You showed that countertop that you did. These were a couple things that were worrying me, but what finish did you use on top of that countertop for that kitchen? Because I did an countertop and I had to change it later to because they didn't want it to yellow and they wanted it to be secure as far as finish and water. I wound up having to do a latex-based urethane, particularly around the sink, because parts of it were turning very black with mold. They needed it to seal, but they didn't want it to yellow at all.
Yeah.
So I was wondering what you...
We were specifically trying to chase a little bit of an amber tone with this on this, and get not necessarily yellow, but that kind of reddish brown hint into that. And what we ended up using was a modified tung oil. Waterlocks is primarily known, and used to be sold as gym floor finish all over the country. And because there's hundreds and hundreds of school gymnasiums done in this stuff, but it is a very good option for blocking out water. That's why they call it Waterlocks. It's not a water-based formula at all. I know you know these things, Chester. But it also will introduce a bit of an ambering. It is a tung oil, but it's a modified tung oil finish, a resin modified tung oil. So it gets even harder than normal tung oils do. And it's a lovely thing to play around with, guys. If you can find that where you're at, Waterlocks, and it's with an X. You can Google that, and you're not doing a lot of a color thing. Well, you can add color if you want, but it has an enhanced colorant to it. It's a good thing for if you put it on some mahogany, it gets kind of that fiery, rusty red thing going on. It can just breathe a little bit of life and kind of turn that natural wood on instead of leaving it pale. But that's what we use.
It does offer a lot of protection too.
Yes,
so
it does.
That's the good thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you, Joshua.
You bet.
We're going to go around full circle and we're going to finish with, I'll just remove Chester 2 seconds. There you go, Chester. Thanks, Chester. We'll go around full circle and we'll finish with Rusty tonight. Last question.
I didn't think you were allowed.
Just for that, I put my name down there, just to make you a little bit more upset.
I thought everybody else but Rusty was allowed.
Are you done yet?
Okay, go.
Okay, so here's the question. So the wait time for you is, what is it, 6 to 9 months or something?
For clients?
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually right now I'm booking for around March of next year.
Are there projects you will not do?
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Tell us about it.
We all should have those projects. I mean, I'm a professional. I make my livelihood doing this. And if you're not, and you're doing it for the kicks, then you definitely should have even more prerequisites as to what you will or won't do, because it should just be something that turns you on, because you're doing it for the fun and the enjoyment. So don't accept anything that doesn't tick all the boxes for you. Life's way too short, and woodworking and craftsmanship is way too difficult to spend it doing things you don't want to do. As a professional, that changes a little bit, and sometimes you're doing what you got to do to put food on the table, and I like a lot of food. So we will take on crazy, funky things. Most of what I work on is in the finishing world. Most of that is on wooden objects, but I'm restoring an antique typewriter right now with a gal. That's a funky thing for me. I had somebody contact me yesterday about an archery bow, all kinds of weird things, gun stocks, and it's not, most of the thing is wooden, but you saw the metal work on that steamer trunk. We do a lot of different funky things. I like to do interesting things that kind of turn me on with the story or the object or something I've never done before. I'm doing a bread making bowl that this great grandmother used to make biscuits for the whole farm crew every morning out of. And the gal wants me to restore that. And I love the story there. Like, yeah, sign me up. Like, it doesn't have to go in a museum. It can go in that family's personal museum in their home. And it's just as valuable to me to work on something like that. But where I do draw the line is when somebody wants me to do something that is a conflict of my personal integrity as a craftsman or as an artist. I'm not going to I don't use chalk paint at all. If I will do a painted piece, it's not going to be chalk paint. A lot of gals will call me up requesting, and I'd love that chalk paint look. Can you do that? No, I cannot do that. I will not do that. If you want a certain look, we can achieve it by using quality products and techniques, but I'm not going to use certain products, even when designers or whatever want to spec those things to me. The answer is still no. I also, regardless of the material used, I will not paint valued antiquities. That's a trend. I know, unfortunately, you've all been seeing it online or whatever, but the concept of I'm over brown, I would like a little color in my life, let's paint this lovely Chippendale sideboard black. I probably am not going to stop you from doing that. If you're that crazy, you're going to find somebody that'll do it, or you'll do it yourself. But I'm not putting my name on that. I don't want to be people to get wind that I did those types of projects, because I've built my reputation on doing the other types of things. So shabby chic is not my cup of tea. In fact, I've always threatened to do a character where I wear a turban and sunglasses, and I am the shabby chic, and I will trample you with my team of Arabian stallions if you ask me to do shabby chic furniture. So those are the types of things I just am not going to make my money doing. It'll end up costing me more money for what somebody finds out, a museum finds out, or a historical group finds out, oh, he's doing this too. He's not our guy anymore, or maybe he never was. But so it costs me money, but it's not fun to me. I don't want to do that. I will paint things that are paint appropriate. That there's a lot of different criteria there, but I just don't want to do it that way. But I mean, other people have a blast living life doing it. Should I just accept that that's okay and we're all different people? Maybe, but I'm not. I still insult them and I hate it.
Accepting it doesn't mean you have to participate.
Right. I'm not going to participate in it. And I accept that it's going to happen whether I do or not. But anyway, those are the main things that I really don't want anything to do. Sometimes I look at a project and I can tell there's no money to be made. It'll be just a whole lot of a pain in the butt, and there's nothing to be made, and I'll pass on a lot of specific projects. But globally speaking, in terms of types of projects that I don't want anything to do with, and we do a lot of painted finishes. We do a whole lot of painted finishes. There are things that it's just perfectly fine to do, and we will do those things, but it mostly relates to painting things that I don't really want to do.
Well, as to finish this, I will tell a little story that you didn't get to, and that was the Miss Ada's table. That this lady was coming out of the hospital, and this is the story I know from Josh's post. She was in her 80s, is that right?
Yeah,
maybe you should
80s.
Tell that story. Yeah, why don't you tell that story?
It feels a little bit like bragging or something, but this is
that's
just
okay.
The way
I
we
asked
like
you to brag.
I'm not really bragging, but this is how we try to roll. I am pretty booked up, but I don't care who's got the money for a rush job. We don't do rush jobs. Save your money, go to the next guy. We do it at the time it takes us to do it, and that keeps us pretty backlogged. But a lady contacted me about a friend that she was looking after that had just had to be forced out of her home into a really small place. Her husband had passed away. Her life was falling apart. And the movers damaged her precious dining room table that was a wedding gift from her husband to her many, many years ago. And this old lady, being an old lady, was obviously a stubborn human being, as old ladies are. And she refused to sit down in her recliner to eat her meals. She would stand, and she could barely stand. She would stand in the kitchen to eat all her meals because she couldn't sit at her table because it was shattered, just obliterated. And I just decided that we were going to have to make that happen. And so it was during the World Series. I'm a big baseball fan, but I would work nights listening to the game on the radio, working on Miss Ada's table because I was going to make sure it got done, and then done in time for Thanksgiving dinner. And so we got that table restored beautifully and got it delivered when she wasn't home. And when she came back from her doctor's appointment, she had her dining room table there, and she was ready to go for Thanksgiving the next week. Most of that really falls at the feet of the gal that contacted me, making sure all that happened. But I am a curmudgeon. I am a highly opinionated curmudgeon. I see a lot of shoddy stuff going on out there, and we work too hard to keep craftsmanship alive. There's not many of us that do it either by hobby or professionally. And so it's easy to get a little bit of a thorn in your side when you see people taking shortcuts and doing shoddy work and getting as much, if not sometimes more money than we get. So I do have a little salt when I speak on craft and keeping the integrity there. But I am a big softy when it comes to the elderly people or people that are in need that can't afford quality craftsmanship. And I don't think that it's just working for rich people, which is what I normally do. That is my calling. I like to spread good craftsmanship around to people of all walks of life. So I do it when we can do it. I like to tell everybody that attorneys are not the only people that get the luxury of doing pro bono work. We can do pro bono work anytime and you just don't hear about it other than because they have this fancy word, pro bono. It just means I'll do it on the house. I'll do it for free for you. And most industries don't really go down that road, but I do. I like to do that. And I think pro bono is a fun thing to be a part of. So that's me.
I think this is a perfect moment to raise a glass and say thank you, Josh. And next time we have a pro bono project, please consider me as your helper.
Certainly. I am grateful, very grateful. Guys, I appreciate the time to speak to you. Hope I didn't offend anybody. If I did, take 2 sips. So anyway, keep craft alive. We can all drink to that.
To the bench.
To the bench.
Johnson to the bench.
To the bench.